In 1953, a LaCrosse babysitter disappeared with hardly a trace. Her name was Evelyn Hartley. This story generated more interest than any of the others. Within 24 hours of our broadcast, police received 17 calls with information about the babysitter's disappearance. In May, the authorities went to Pickwick, Minnesota, in search of a car that was reportedly buried with the body. There were hopes that the Evelyn Hartley case would finally be solved, but to this day, the Hartley story remains one of the greatest mysteries in the Coulee region. It was the big game, LaCrosse State Teachers College against River Falls. Homecoming, October 24th, 1953. It seemed nearly everyone in the city was going to be there. It would be a good time, especially if LaCrosse won. Professor Viggo Rasmussen was just one of nearly 1,000 people who were going to that game. Rasmussen had made plans nearly a week before to have the daughter of one of his colleagues babysit his 20-month-old daughter. The babysitter's name was Evelyn Hartley, a 15-year-old Central High School junior. She had babysat for the Rasmussens before. Evelyn lived with her family here at 1533 Johnson. About 6:30 that night, Professor Rasmussen arrived to pick up Evelyn for her babysitting job. The Rasmussen home was just 5 minutes away. The Rasmussen home was located in what was called the Coulee Addition. They had lived in their new home at 2415 Heschler Drive for only 3 months. When they arrived, Mrs. Rasmussen gave Evelyn her instructions for the night. She was to put the baby to bed at 7 o'clock and to cover her at 7:15. It would be an easy night for Evelyn, and she would have plenty of time for her homework. At 6:45, the professor, his wife, and their 7-year-old daughter left the house for the game, not knowing that it would be the last time anyone would ever see Evelyn. Call it a mother's intuition, but at 7 o'clock that night, Mrs. Hartley had a feeling she should call her daughter. But she decided not to, since Evelyn had left home only a half hour before, and Evelyn had a habit of always calling home at 8:30. So Mrs. Hartley decided to wait, not knowing that at that very moment, a prowler was lurking outside the Rasmussen home.
I do remember checking some of the backyards in the neighborhood, and we did find some footprints appeared to be made by a tennis shoe in the fresh dirt out there behind the houses, and we suspected that person was prowling the area and in that house where the Hartley girl was babysitting.
When Evelyn failed to call her parents at 8:30, they became worried, and after a short time, Mr. Hartley decided to call his daughter at the Rasmussen home, but there was no answer. He called again and even checked the number in the telephone book, but still no answer. This was not normal, so Richard Hartley decided to go to the Rasmussen home to investigate. Hartley told police it was about 20 minutes after 9 when he arrived. He said he knocked on all the doors and windows, but he got no answer. But looking through a window, he could see one of Evelyn's shoes and her glasses lying on the living room floor. Hartley began to look around the house, and then he found the open basement window. These are original police photographs. At the foot of the stairs, Hartley found his daughter's shoe. Climbing the stairs, entering the living room, he found the other shoe and his daughter's glasses lying on the living room floor. Walking into the baby's room, he found the baby fast asleep, still uncovered. Not knowing what to think now, Hartley left the home, crossed the street to the home of Frank Lindner, and asked for help.
When I went to the door and talked to him, he said he had been in the habit of calling his daughter when she was out on babysitting jobs, and he did that, and no response, so he came out here to see what was wrong. He said he looked around the house and he says, there's something wrong over there. I just don't know what it is, but I asked him if we should call the police, and he said, I sure think we should. I asked him if he wanted me to do it, and he said, would you please do it for me? So I called the police, and that's a few minutes later they were here, and that was the beginning of the story.
The call to police was logged in at 9:49.
And we received a call of a missing girl or missing person over on the east end of town. So we proceeded to go over there. And it was close to quitting time, so I mentioned to my partner that we should get this cleared up in about 10 minutes and we'll be able to go home on time.
Don Schoenfeld and his partner, Ken Johnson, were the first to arrive on the scene. When they got the call, they were watching the football game from their squad car. It took only minutes to get to the Rasmussen home.
When we got out there, we found, I believe we found Mr. Hartley present. And in looking the situation over, we found that somebody had entered the house on the south side of the house through the basement window. I recall seeing a shoe at the base of the basement stairs. And the girl was gone. There was a young child, if I'm not mistaken, left in the house, in the bedroom, in the crib. We figured we had something fairly serious at that time, so we notified headquarters, and they contacted the investigation bureau and they sent out a detective.
That night, police conducted a search of the area. They found blood stains outside the basement window, and a neighbor reported hearing screams in the area about 7:15. The search was eventually called off about 1 in the morning, and the Rasmussens were allowed to return to their home.
I think we did the best we could for that night, and finally the detective said, well, come back in the morning and clear it up then. And we left the scene the way it was, and we protected the scene and left it the way it was until the following morning. And after that, the detective bureau took over, and they were back out there the next day.
The LaCrosse victory over River Falls topped the local news the next morning, but word of the babysitter's strange and mysterious disappearance began to filter out. By noon, nearly 1,000 people had converged on the Rasmussen home to see where it happened and to help with the search.
Fairly early in the morning, there was an announcement out by the police department for volunteers. And it seems to me it was around close to noon when the chief of police came out here and stood over there on the steps of the house and gave instructions to all the people that volunteered. And there was a lot of them because they were lined up clear across the street here in our yard. And put us in groups and sent us out in various directions to do a search. I took a group up to French Island. And we walked across French Island, following their instructions, what to look for, and then reported back, and others were doing the same thing. Actually, that went on for a couple days, several days.
Bob Mark was one of the searchers.
The call went out, so everybody was doing their duty, and everything that we saw, we picked up, and we turned over. And everything thought it was going to be the piece of evidence that was going to break the case. And of course, I was about, I would say 20, 22. There were old people, there were young people, a lot of kids running around. It was a circus.